Good morning. Thank you for your patience, and thank you also for adapting to a slightly different day of the week and a slightly different start time. But let's get started. So I'm John Rhodes. I'm the chair of the Public Service Commission, and I call this session of the Public Service Commission to order. Before we start, a couple of comments. One about mechanics. I would like to note that our live webcasting will end by noon today. We don't expect that to be a constraint, but if necessary, the recording, but not the live webcasting, will be continue beyond noon, and the complete recording and transcript will be posted on the website. That's obviously an important item in order to stay within process, but now I'd like to go to another item which is important in a very different way. And I'd like to ask my colleague, Commissioner Berman, to provide some comments or remarks about our colleague, Jeremy Belda. Commissioner Berman.
One of our own at the Department Commission died last week. Jeremy Belda, 26 years old, was an assistant mechanical engineer in our gas safety division. I, along with some of the staff on behalf of the Commission and the Department, met his father, sister, and one of his brothers this Sunday when they came in from California. And we spent time with them talking and reminiscing about Jeremy. It's important for us to take a little bit of time and let you know who Jeremy was. He graduated from the University of California, San Diego in 2014 with the Bachelor of Science degree in Environmental Engineering. He was a certified engineer in training issued by the California Board for Engineers, Land Surveyors, and Geologists since August of 2014. In February 2015, we were lucky enough to hire him in the Albany office. Truth be told, he was supposed to go to our New York City office, but due to a personnel snafu, he got assigned to our Albany office. For a kid from California moving across the country, he was focused on living the dream in New York City. We tried to convince him our Albany, New York was like the Albany, California area that he grew up in. He did love our Albany, just not the cold. While here, he became familiar with federal and state pipeline safety regulations, as well as with the operations of the major gas utilities in New York State. His duties included reviewing proposed pipeline designs, reviewing proposed updates to gas utility operations and maintenance procedures, reviewing proposed changes to federal and state pipeline safety codes, and preparing citations for enforcement of probable violations relating to damage prevention. His other duties included conducting record field and construction inspections of local distribution companies and interstate pipeline operators to ensure compliance with federal and state pipeline safety regulations. But these work duties don't fully capture the kind of worker Jeremy was. Jeremy was one of our rising stars. He was going to be the one we would all say when he made it big. We knew him when. He was an essential member of the pipeline safety team. He read chemical chemistry and thermodynamic books just for fun. His intelligence was unparalleled, and he often was called upon by his colleagues and managers because he was considered the smartest one in the room, even with those who had years and years of experience. He wanted to be challenged and excelled at everything he did. He made friends with coworkers easily and built an incredible rapport with many people in the gas safety world. He was respected for his knowledge and dedication on the job, and he was regarded as highly dependable, even when he didn't have to be. It's no surprise that everyone who knew Jeremy loved him. Everyone who was lucky enough to be his friend was gifted with his friendship. He was a very loving and kind young man. He was the youngest of 4 children born to George and Susan. The theme in his family is, if you're a girl, your name started with an S, and if a boy, it started with a J. His sister Sarah and brothers Joe and Joshua loved their little brother, as did his 2 nieces and 2 nephews. Sarah shared that her brother loved to light up a room, especially if he was in an airport or a bar at a party, and people weren't feeling initially upbeat or happy. He was a trained concert pianist and would sit if there was a piano and play what he knew would instantly connect with people and get them instantly bonding and happy. Of course, he played Piano Man. He was very close to his family, loved his Filipino heritage, and loved as the only grandchild born in the U.S., his now deceased grandfather would introduce him as, "This is my grandson, the one who will become the President of the United States someday." He was also civic-minded, volunteering for the Boys and Girls Club, and in honor of one of his nephews who had a successful kidney transplant, giving blood routinely. He had been a straight-A student, but once getting his first and maybe only B in cooking, he was so incensed that he got a B that he went out and perfected the art of cooking, even working for some time in the food industry, proving he was really deserving of that A. But I think the story that truly captures the essence of Jeremy was shared on Sunday jointly by his sister and brother. He was 14 years old, home alone, and his parents were out of town. Bored, he decided to take his sister's car and drive it. Unfortunately, without ever having driven a car before, he crashed it into a tree, and he was unharmed, but the car was badly damaged. He somehow managed to get it home, and it sat in the driveway. He immediately called his sister and told her he messed up, explained what happened, and said how sorry he was. She called her other brother, and they as a family discussed what to do, knowing how angry and upset his parents would be when they came home. Jeremy's siblings decided, since his brother was old enough to drive, his brother would willingly take the blame for Jeremy, and Jeremy could, when his parents come home, rat out his brother to his parents and say his brother drove the car. When his parents came home, he immediately sat down with them and confessed that it was he, Jeremy, who drove his sister's car without permission and was willing to take whatever punishment was due. To all of us, that sums up the kind of character that Jeremy was made of. Over the last week, we've all been struggling to make sense of this sudden and painful loss. Many in the Gas Safety Division were getting ready to celebrate with him on his upcoming birthday, September 23rd. We are heartbroken and so sad for his family. In closing, I'd like to say Jeremy was one of our own. Jeremy's absence will leave a hole in our gas safety family and in our hearts, but he also leaves us wonderful memories that will endure so that he will always be with us. May we strive to make Jeremy proud of us as we continue in our important work. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that very human moment. This is obviously is very tough news. It's a very hard loss, hardest of all on his family and on his close colleagues and friends. Our thoughts are with them. Thank you. So I'd like now to move to the regular business of the commission. Secretary Burgess, are there any changes to the final agenda?
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. There are no changes to this morning's agenda.
Thank you. With that, we'll move to the first item for discussion. Item 101, case 18G0278, which is a petition of Brooklyn Union Gas Company doing business as National Grid New York for a limited waiver of tariff provisions for interruptible service to multiple customers, presented by Mike Reeder, Chief Gas and Water Rates and Supply, Cindy McMahon, Deputy Director for Gas and Water, and Eric Reeder, Utility Supervisor, Gas and Water Rates and Supply, are available for questions. Mike, please begin.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. Item 101 addresses the petition of National Grid New York requesting a limited waiver of its tariff provisions regarding penalty charges for unauthorized use of gas for 89 temperature-controlled, or commonly called TC, interruptible customers. The company's tariff allows it to impose unauthorized use of gas penalties at either the higher of 2 times the sum of the daily market price of natural gas plus the applicable transportation rate, or 9 times the applicable sales rate. The company requests that it be allowed to impose the lesser of the 2 penalty options. TC Service is a long-standing demand response program that allows National Grid to reduce gas during periods of peak usage by offering a reduced delivery rate to customers who agree to interrupt gas service during cold weather periods. This type of service benefits all customers by using the gas distribution system more efficiently. TC customers use the distribution system when it is free of capacity constraints, but during times of peak demand, remove their usage from the system. This allows the company to spread the cost of operating the system over a larger customer base without the need for system enhancements to meet a higher peak demand. However, if TC customers do not interrupt service when required to do so by the company, gas demand is not reduced and system reliability is jeopardized. Therefore, a penalty for the unauthorized use of gas is used to incent TC customers to interrupt service when the temperature drops below a designated threshold. The magnitude of the penalty is designed to ensure that customers do not choose to use gas during an interruption and pay the penalty, rather than use their alternative fuel when they have access to it. In order to ensure the reliability of its system, National Grid must have confidence that TC customers will not use natural gas when an interruption is called. To that end, TC customers must have access to a minimum of 10 days' supply of an alternative fuel source, typically number 2 oil. Access can mean either sufficient physical storage on site or contracts guaranteeing the delivery of fuel. National Grid also conducts an annual test of all TC customers' ability to interrupt service. All 89 TC customers involved in this petition passed that preparedness test in November 2017. In December 2017 and continuing into January 2018, National Grid's TC customers were required to interrupt service during 2 nearly consecutive but distinct extreme cold weather periods. The first event lasted 7 days from December 28th to January 3rd, and the second event lasted 4.5 days from January 4th to January 8th. 46 TC customers used natural gas during the first interruption period. 89 more customers used natural gas during the second interruption period for a total of 135 customers. The 89 TC customers subject to this petition appropriately refrained from using gas during the entire first interruption period and during the beginning of the second interruption period. However, as the second interruption period continued, an unexpected shortage of fuel delivery services occurred in New York City. In order to provide heating for schools, city buildings, and public housing during the extreme cold, the 89 TC customers used gas without authorization subsequent to notifying the company. National Grid's tariff calls for the imposition of unauthorized use of gas penalties for TC customers at the higher of 2 times the sum of the market price plus the transportation rate, or approximately $12.50 per therm, which would have resulted in aggregate penalties of approximately $1.5 million, or 9 times the applicable sales rate, or approximately $5 per therm, which would have resulted in aggregate penalties of approximately $600,000. National Grid has not yet billed customers these penalty charges. Instead, in its petition, the company requests a waiver of the tariff provisions so that it can charge the 89 TC customers who use gas during the latter stages of the second event and not during the first event penalties using the lesser penalty option. National Grid has not requested a waiver of the 46 TC customers that use natural gas during the first and second interruption period. All 89 TC customers subject to this petition demonstrated the ability to interrupt service as of November 2017. However, given the length of the nearly consecutive interruption periods, the limited supply of oil during the interruption periods, and the need to continue to heat the premises such as public buildings, including schools and multifamily dwellings, these customers were unable to interrupt service during the entire second interruption period. It should be acknowledged that these customers are neither firm natural gas customers nor firm oil customers. As a result, neither the gas utility nor the oil industry prioritizes the delivery of fuel to these customers. These 89 TC customers' unauthorized use of gas reflects neither poor planning on the part of the customers or that they chose to continue to use gas during the interruption even though they had access to their alternative fuel. In this instance, Due to the spike in natural gas prices at the time of the interruption, staff believes that the penalty charges indicated by the tariff exceed the level necessary to ensure future compliance by these 89 customers. The penalty charges proposed in the petition, reflecting the lesser tariff option of 9 times the applicable sales rate, should adequately serve the purpose of the unauthorized use of gas penalty charge in this instance. Accordingly, National Grid's request for a limited one-time waiver of the unauthorized use of gas penalty for the specified 89 TC customers is recommended to be approved. Thank you. We are available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for the presentation. This strikes me as a reasonable remedy, reasonable in scope and character, to some clear and compelling and unusual facts. I'm going to be in favor of this item. I'll now turn to my fellow commissioners. Commissioner Sayre.
To me, this is a simple item of fairness for customers in an unexpected, extreme, and unavoidable situation. For the future, however, although I support this item on a one-time waiver basis, this situation can no longer be considered unavoidable or unexpected. We may need tariff changes, and I understand they're being discussed. Customer behavior and backup arrangements may need to be changed. So I do want to stress that although what we're doing today is fair for these customers under the current circumstances, it's a one-time deal.
Thank you. Commissioner Berman.
Thank you. I just wanted to, I do support the item. I think it is important that we grant this waiver, but I do just want to point out a couple of things. I spent a considerable amount of time going over this item and looking at what led up to this item. I don't necessarily consider it a shock that we were looking at potential waivers. Back at the Polar Vortex, we opened a proceeding, case 15G0185, that looked at this very issue of interruptible customers, temperature control customers, and what were the necessary communication protocols, because at that time we had circumstances where there was delivery of heating fuel to customers were challenged. And we made some changes there, but we didn't necessarily address it completely, as this item shows us. What we did in the 2016 rate case was we issued a directive for a collaborative. Actually, the report for that collaborative is going to be due September 17th, Monday of this year. So that's 2 years later from, or almost 2 years later, so it was December, from the rate case. And so for me, it was a question of understanding why it took that long. And I think that it has been a thoughtful process. The rate case and the joint proposal looked at a temperature control moratorium in the joint proposal during the term of the rate case. So there were sort of 3 criteria that were established. One was you couldn't add new temperature control customers. 2 was all temperature control customers could remain in that class. And then the 3rd was temperature control customers could only switch to firm if the companies were able to. The thing that concerns me is we have seen since that rate case a decrease in the temperature control customers. But it is, for me, us to explore, and that's why I look forward to the September 17th report, it is to look at what this means for the upcoming winter and future winters, but it also means what are we doing to look at the natural gas demand that we may need? Switching to alternative fuels and customers who choose to be a part of that is very helpful. But if in fact it is causing a problem, as this item shows, when there is not that alternative fuel to switch to, and some of those temperature control customers are locked into a situation where they can't switch to firm even if they would choose to, because there is not an increase, there is not the ability for capacity purposes to do so. The company is still working through those issues with what they need to be able to, and they can't because it would put the system in a dire situation. So we really do need to look at that. Plus, how many customers are not choosing to go onto temperature control because they can't, because of our moratorium on that, that's actually causing a problem, so that we should be looking at all of those items and how to address it and what that protocol means. I do flag that there have been other waiver situations before us. We had one with SUNY Downstate where there was a settlement agreement that we approved. SUNY Downstate, after the issue, moved to firm. And that solved their problem. So there may be, out of these 89, and I point out 89 of these customers, 48 or 49 of them are, I believe, all of them are schools, or they're government, they're city-owned, and a large portion of that are schools. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. And the city itself submitted a submitted a response in support of the petition, talking about the critical need for the gas to be available to those customers, and also looking forward to the collaborative to address the issues and to help in terms of some of the needs for those customers, including whether it would be opportunity for moving to firm. So I do think that, for me, what I take pause at is that we're all in this together, so it's not just the companies being told this is a one-time waiver. Like with SUNY Downstate, the company worked with the customer and then was able to move to firm. That's not going to be the case for a large majority of these customers, and therefore they may be in a perilous position. And we need to be able to have the energy needs, in this case gas, if the alternative fuel is not available. So I just want to flag that for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Lisi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm willing to support this recommendation with the understanding that we're not establishing a permanent benchmark for situations that are similar in the future.
Thank you very much. With that, we'll proceed to call for a vote. My own vote is in favor of the recommendation to grant the limited waiver as discussed. Commissioner Sayre, how do you vote? Aye. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Lisi, how do you vote? Aye. The item is approved and the recommendations are adopted. We'll now move to the second item for discussion, item 302, case 16E0060, which addresses Consolidated Edison's Smart Charge New York program, presented by Rob Cully, Utility Engineering Specialist 2. Rob, please begin.
Good morning, Chair Rhodes and Commissioners. Item 302 is a draft order addressing a petition by Consolidated Edison Company of New York, Inc., referred to as Con Edison or the company, seeking to expand eligibility of its Smart Charge New York off-peak electric vehicle or EV charging program to medium and heavy-duty EVs. The Smart Charge New York program was initially approved as part of the joint proposal describing Con Edison's latest rate proceeding in the Commission's order approving electric and gas rate plans on January 25th, 2017. I'll refer to this as the 2017 rate order. As part of the joint proposal adopted by the 2017 rate order, the Smart Charge New York program was initially limited to light-duty EVs, such as passenger vehicles. However, the joint proposal required Con Edison to commence discussions with interested parties to consider development of incentive programs, among other initiatives, to incentivize off-peak charging of EVs, including cars, light trucks, heavy trucks, and buses. On March 1st, 2018, Con Edison filed a petition requesting authorization to expand its Smart Charge New York off-peak charging incentive program to include medium and heavy-duty EVs. The expanded program would operate under the budget authorized in the 2017 rate order and would begin testing the responsiveness of a number of larger EVs to off-peak charging incentives. 5 parties commented on Con Edison's petition: CalSTART, the City of New York, or City, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, or MTA, Green Lots, and BYD America. The parties were unanimously supportive of Con Edison's proposal to expand eligibility to participate in the Smart Charge New York program, citing numerous environmental and economic benefits of electrifying vehicles in the medium and heavy-duty sector. 2 parties, MTA and Green Lots, proposed further revisions, including adding a callable demand response-like aspect to the Smart Charge New York program, and suggested that base electric rates for EVs include the value of environmental benefits. The draft order before you, Commissioners, approves Con Edison's petition to expand eligibility for the Smart Charge New York program to include medium and heavy-duty EVs. The draft order also states that consideration of the program and rate modifications beyond the scope of the company's petition, as proposed by Green Lots and the MTA, would be better suited for discussion as part of the ongoing generic EV proceeding in Case 18E0138. This concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have at this time, along with John Sipos.
Thank you, Rob. This strikes me as a useful, budget-prudent, limited expansion of an existing and innovative program, tailored to some market realities as those are presented to us, with a smart delineation of what this limited order will take up and what will be reserved for action in the generic proceeding. I find this sensible, and I will be in favor of this item. Commissioner Sayre?
I'm a fan of the electrification of transportation and also of well-designed voluntary time of use rates. What's a good program, though, and what are good rates involves some very difficult issues. The program has to be attractive to customers. It has to be beneficial to the environment. It has to tend to reduce the utilities costs. And at worst, it has to be no additional burden on non-participating customers. These are conflicting goals that are not easy to achieve. In my view, Con Ed's program, as expanded by this item, will help us answer these issues and hopefully get to increased acceleration of electrification of transportation and good time of use rates.
Thank you. Commissioner Berman?
So I do have issues with this item. I looked at the record and went back in 2017, as you said, the Con Ed rate order looked at this SMART New York program, and it was in limited fashion, and we supported it at that time. The rate order, the joint proposal, and this order does not clearly define or give clear guidance on the specifics of the implementation plan and what exactly we are drilling down to look at and get information from. Generically, we do it, but we don't give real clear guidance on exactly what we're looking at. Plus, we're not necessarily addressing except for acknowledging that there are potential issues with this. The other parties point out specific logistical challenges. We acknowledge that there are potential issues and concerns, and we sort of give lip service to it by saying that's why this program is going to help highlight that, without necessarily us doing the hard work of clearly expressing some of what those issues will be and how we will be looking to identify and capture and evaluate, and in what time frame. And we also, while we seem to say it's okay because they're not increasing the budget, we didn't do a due diligence in going back and looking at why we gave that initial budget at that time and what some of the impact may be, and why they can do it within the budget now, increasing to heavy and medium EVs, and giving some analysis for that and showing that there's no harm. And also, part of the reason we did it in a limited fashion before was so that we could look at it and have some clear guidance before we moved into the next phase, which may be this. And since there is a natural fit to other ongoing proceedings, we shouldn't sidestep and decide some of those things until we clearly look at what's going on in the larger picture. And my fear is that we are just a slippery slope to get to an end result that has not carefully evaluated, and that concerns me. I do want to say that some of the issues as it applies to the EV charging rate design and EV tariff are definitely things that we really need to take a lot of hard look at, and especially because the legislature had imposed some tariff requirements for EV before, if I'm not mistaken. Tammy, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. So just want to make sure I'm right. It might be appropriate, especially as it relates to MTA and budget, to look at it as those aspects of it and what it means for the budget. And that just, for me, gives me pause. We're not addressing that now. We say we'll look at it later, but I do just want to make sure that it's not just us, the commission, but there are other folks who have to be involved in some of those decisions as it relates to that. Overall, I'm going to be voting no without prejudice, because I do think that if we came back and looked at it more holistically and had some more actual analysis on some of the items and the time frame. Plus, we have not seen an analysis on how it's worked so far with the ongoing program, because it's just getting off the ground. So that concerns me. So I'll be voting no without prejudice to come back.
Thank you. Commissioner Alisi? All right, thank you very much. With that, we will proceed to call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to expand eligibility for the Smart Charge New York program as discussed. Commissioner Sayre, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
I vote no without prejudice to come back.
Thank Thank you. Commissioner Lisi, how do you vote?
Aye.
The item is approved and the recommendation is adopted. We will now move to item 3 for discussion, item 301, case 18E0485, which is a petition of NRG Community Solar LLC for a declaratory ruling presented by Ted Kelly, Assistant Counsel. Marco Padula, Acting Director of Markets and Innovation, and Warren Myers, Director, Office of Market and Regulatory Economics, are available for questions. Ted, please begin.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Rhodes and Commissioners. This item is a declaratory ruling regarding a petition filed by NRG Community Solar, LLC, regarding the compensation applicable to several Community Distributed Generation, or CDG, projects owned by NRG Community Solar. CDG was authorized by the Commission in July 2015 to offer the benefits of clean distributed energy to ratepayers that might not otherwise have access to them, and to encourage the continued development of renewable resources. The CDG program allows the owner of an eligible distributed generation project, referred to as the sponsor, to inject electricity into the utility system in return for credits, which are distributed to members of the CDG program in order to reduce the utility bills of those members. Under the CDG order, the value of those credits is based on utility rates consistent with net energy metering, also called NEM, rules. The CDG order stated that non-demand metered CDG projects would generate volumetric credits, which are transferred to a subscriber's utility bill as kilowatt-hour credits, and reduce that bill based on the dollar per kilowatt-hour rate applicable to that individual subscriber. The CDG order also stated that, by contrast, demand-metered CDG projects would generate monetary credits, which are transferred to subscribers' utility bills as dollar value credits based on the dollar per kilowatt-hour rate applicable at the site of the project. The Commission modified the compensation rules for CDG projects in the Value of Distributed Energy Resources, or VDER, transition order issued in March 2017, which directed the transition of compensation for distributed generation resources from net metering to the value stack. As transitional mechanisms, the VDER transition order established Phase 1 NEM, a limited continuation of net metering style compensation, and an adder to the value stack for mass market customers, which is referred to as the Market Transition Credit, or MTC. 3 declining tranches of set numbers of megawatts of CDG capacity were established in each utility service territory. Projects in Tranche 0/1 received either Phase 1 NEM or the value stack with the highest level of MTC, depending on when they met specific qualification requirements, while projects in Tranches 2 and 3 received the value stack with reduced levels of MTCs. The MTC for Tranche 1 was designed to make the total value stack for projects receiving that MTC approximately equal to the value of NEM as calculated for a project receiving volumetric crediting. The order explained that this would result in Phase 1 NEM projects and Tranche 1 projects receiving approximately equivalent compensation. The VDER transition order also calculated the costs of the transitional mechanisms by assuming that Phase 1 NEM projects and Tranche 1 projects would impose the same costs on utilities. In its petition, NRG Solar explains that it is the owner and CDG sponsor for several projects in the service territories of Central Hudson and Orange and Rockland that are in Tranche 0 and that are entitled to Phase 1 NEM compensation. The petition states that, based on utility statements, several of these projects are or are likely to be subject to demand-metered service classes. The petition explains that the utility tariffs for Phase 1 NEM at those utilities apply monetary crediting to CDG projects served under demand-metered service classes based on the utility's interpretation of the CDG order. NRG Solar explains that it had planned the projects, invested substantial funds, and signed up customers based on a belief that the projects would receive volumetric crediting, and states that receiving monetary crediting instead would substantially impair the value of the projects. NRG Solar argues that the application of demand-metered service classes and monetary crediting to these projects is inconsistent with the VDER transition order, and requests that the Commission issue a declaratory ruling stating that Central Hudson and O&R's interpretations of their SC2 and VDER tariffs are inconsistent with the VDER transition order and the CDG order. Several solar developers submitted comments supporting the petition. Orange and Rockland and Central Hudson each submitted comments opposing the petition. O&R states that it is and has been plain in the relevant tariff that NRG Solar's projects, as designed, would be demand metered and that demand metered projects would receive monetary crediting. O&R argues that this is the obvious and correct interpretation of its tariff and that NRG Solar has failed to meet the high bar for a tariff waiver. Central Hudson argues that the petition is premature with respect to its utility territory because it is not known at this time whether any of NRG Solar's projects in that territory will be served based on demand metered service classes. In addition, Central Hudson argues that all customers, including CDG projects, should be required to install a demand meter and pay demand charges where their usage meets the relevant standard to avoid inequitable cost shifts among service classes and to ensure proper metering. The declaratory ruling determines that O&R and Central Hudson are correctly determining the appropriate service class for each customer, including CDG projects, based on their tariffs. The standards for classifying customers, as well as the rates applicable to each class, have been established for each utility as part of comprehensive rate cases and found by the Commission to result in just and reasonable rates. As Central Hudson and O&R argue, the bar for a waiver to a tariff is very high, and NRG Solar has not met that burden. However, NRG Solar, as well as commenters supporting the petition, correctly identify a conflict between the VDER transition order and the utilities Phase 1 NEM tariffs. As discussed, the VDER transition order clearly identifies Tranche 0, which entitles projects to Phase 1 NEM, as financially equivalent to Tranche 1. As the MDC for Tranche 1 was calculated based on volumetric crediting, this is only true where Tranche 0 projects receive volumetric crediting, since CDG projects that receive monetary crediting would receive significantly less value for their subscribers. Similarly, the calculation of net revenue impacts of the tranches assumed that Tranche 0 and 1 would have the equivalent costs, which is only true if they provide equivalent compensation. Therefore, this declaratory ruling declares that, pursuant to the Commission's VDER transition order, CDG projects that receive compensation under Phase 1 net metering rules shall have credits distributed to their subscribers using a volumetric crediting methodology, regardless of the project's service class, meter type, or billing methodology. This ruling does not affect the compensation of CDG projects receiving value stack compensation, including projects in tranches 1, 2, 3, and 4. That concludes my presentation, and I, along with Mark Goenwarren, am available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. That there is, in fact, a inconsistency between orders and tariffs that are cited here. That fact of inconsistency is objectively true. I find this recommendation carefully addresses that inconsistency carefully and clearly in a manner that's aligned with the development of Commission findings and guidance. That development, in turn, reflects the evolution of market realities. I think this is an appropriate resolution, and I'm going to be in favor of this item. Commissioner Sayre.
I fully agree with the chair. We never intended Tranche 0 to be worse off than Tranche 1. The developers have correctly interpreted our order. The utilities have not. This is a simple resolution.
Commissioner Berman.
So what if the issue is we didn't intend it, but it is what happened and we didn't do the right analysis? So that's what gives me pause, that if we're saying that there's an inconsistency between the VDER order and the tariff, maybe we need to look more closely at some of the challenges that are being raised with the VDER order, which are not just in this particular declaratory ruling, but looking at all of the different aspects and making sure that we holistically address them, which we are doing in other cases, but I feel like we're doing it very clunky and not necessarily in a systematic way that is for me concerning. This declaratory ruling is missing what I see as a key element, which is the analysis on the impact of customers and the grid. What are the number that we're looking at? How far-reaching besides this particular customer? What does it mean? Here we make in this order, we make a very broad statement where we apply it to all utilities because we say it's okay, we can do that, because it's just clarifying the existing orders. For me, I look and I say, well, did we give those other utilities who did not have the opportunity to respond some type of notice that we were going to take it past these two utilities, Orange and Rockland and Central Hudson, and apply it to them? Because maybe those other utilities, as well as those other customers in those utility areas, would have had some comments that would have helped us in understanding, and also in the record to support or not what we were doing. And so for me, I am very cognizant of the fact that the failure for us to do that means that we don't necessarily have as full of a record as that we could if we had taken the time. We don't have to legally. It's a declaratory ruling. So I know you're getting ready to talk over there. But I am acknowledging we don't have to. The question isn't, do we have to legally? The question is, should we have, as a pure matter of fuller record and an opportunity for making sure that we have the full information that we need. So that concerns me significantly. The other issue that I have here is that we do not, in the discussion phase, discuss expressly how different it is from the Cornell matter. And I think we should have taken the time legally to map out very expressly what the clear distinction was or not, and how relevant it was. There is the parties took time to discuss Cornell, and I think we should have expressly taken the time to answer it very directly, and make the analysis that how we support it, even if I would disagree. I think that there was also comments made by the at least one of the utilities that they were open to discussing solutions. I think that, to me, goes to the heart of what are we doing in terms of bringing parties together before we issue our rulings. We have in some cases done that. We have an ombudsman on interconnection issues as well. And I think this would have been an opportunity, while again we think that it's clear, they could have come together and resolved their issues that would have at least made it helpful to those parties as well as then the larger, and we should have taken that opportunity to say, let's think about what that means and where is the ombudsman's role in this and working with them, but also as it goes towards the other utilities where this order will apply to them and to their customers. The response to the petition also raised issues about energy and whether or not they should have had notice, and whether or not they failed to do their due diligence in looking at the tariff, as well as the fact that they acquired these properties, the development, after the fact. And so we do not mention at all in the order that issue expressly and resolve that issue. We have in other cases where we're looking at going, in main tier and where we have said to parties, you take what you have and we're applying it to you, even if it's unfair. You're have to deal with that. And so here we should have made a distinction on why, and how widespread this is. And we should have known, and we should do our due diligence in exactly how many potential other companies and customers this will affect, so that we could make sure that we're carefully evaluating it on that perspective. So I'm going to be a no on this, and I think that it's important that we do get the process right, but also substantively work through some of the challenges. I do note also that the town of Woodstock, in another proceeding, an energy efficiency proceeding, raised concerns with the VETR order as it relates to LED street lighting. And that also gives me pause, because again, we're looking at what it means for VETR, and then there are other side issues that get raised that seem outside of the scope of this. And then the fourth and final, I think I already said final, but now it is really the final. The other issue is what other declaratory rulings or what other declaratory requests are out there that may be impacted by this. For example, I know there's a recent filing from AES, and to the extent that if it is impacted, we should be addressing that, and we should, as a commission, know what the list of outstanding declaratory requests are out there on that might impact this, to know whether or not we need to have a fuller discussion in those issues and how it relates. I don't want to just see then that petitions that wind up becoming withdrawn because now we've dealt with something. We should clearly know ahead of time what the impact may be on some of those. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman. Commissioner Lisi. Thank you. With that, I will proceed to call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to issue the declaratory ruling as discussed. Commissioner Sayre, how do you vote? Aye. Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
No.
Commissioner Alisi, how do you vote? Aye. The item is approved and the recommendation is adopted. We will now move to the fourth item for discussion. Item 303, cases 15E0751 et al., as they relate to expansion of value stack eligibility and interzonal crediting, presented again by Ted Kelly, and again Marco Padula and Warren Myers are available for questions. Ted, please begin.
Thank you. As I discussed in the context of the previous item, the Value of Distributed Energy Resources, or VDER, order issued in March 2017 directed the transition of compensation for distributed generation from net metering to the value stack. Eligibility for value stack compensation was initially limited in that order to projects that were previously eligible for net metering, which includes solar, wind, hydroelectric, farm waste anaerobic digester, and fuel cell projects with a rated capacity of 2 megawatts or less, as well as combined heat and power, or CHP, units with a rated capacity between 1 and 10 kilowatts, as well as storage paired with any eligible resource. In a February 2018 order, the Commission expanded eligibility to projects that used one of those same technologies other than CHP and had a rated capacity of more than 2 megawatts but less than 5 megawatts. The VDER transition order directed staff, in collaboration with stakeholders, to develop proposals for expanding value stack eligibility to other distributed energy resources, or DERs, including specifically standalone storage or battery projects. Staff worked with stakeholders through the VDER Value Stack Working Group to pursue these objectives and filed a staff proposal on value stack eligibility expansion on May 22nd of this year. In addition, a notice soliciting comments on the staff proposal and related matters was issued on the same date. The staff proposal recommended that value stack eligibility be extended based on a set of principles: the practicality of such extension, the ripeness of a particular technology, a finding that there would be no negative environmental impacts, a finding that there would be no expected non-participant cost impacts, technology neutrality to the extent possible based on similar values created by different technologies, the continued use of value-based crediting, an electricity injection focus, and the use of the market transition credit only as a transitional element for NEM-eligible resources. Based on these principles, the staff proposal recommends the removal of customer type-based technology and size limits, such as limits on exactly how big a residential solar project can be as opposed to a commercial solar project. In addition, it recommends the extension of value stack eligibility to all clean generation resources as defined based on eligibility for the Commission's renewable energy standard with a capacity of 5 megawatts or less. One significant resource that will be included under the standard that was not previously value stack eligible are food waste-based anaerobic digesters. There are also other more minor and unusual technology types such as tidal energy generators. The staff proposal also recommends the extension of value stack eligibility to standalone storage projects, as well as projects involving the injection of energy recovered through regenerative braking into the grid. The staff proposal recommended certain specific provisions to ensure that these changes will not create inequities for non-participating ratepayers or encourage uneconomic arbitrage. In particular, that storage projects be subject to mandatory hourly pricing so that the cost of energy to charge the storage will be calculated in an equivalent manner to the compensation of energy injected from the storage, unless those projects are designed only to offset on-site load. Secondly, that generators eligible for the value stack pursuant to these orders be subject to the same standby tariff rules as other customers. In addition, the notice issued the same day requested comment on interzonal crediting, which would permit community distributed generation projects as well as remote crediting projects receiving compensation based on the value stack to share credits with customers in the same utility service territory but in a different load zone than the generator, and also requested comment on whether the minimum CDG subscription size, which is currently 1,000 kilowatt hours per year, should be reduced. A number of stakeholders submitted comments regarding the staff proposal and the notice. The comments generally supported the proposed principles and proposed expansion of eligibility. Some commenters requested that combined heat and power also be included in the eligibility expansion, while others opposed eligibility for larger CHP projects at this time. Some commenters opposed or recommended modifications to the applicability of standby rates as well. With regard to the notice, most commenters, including the joint utilities, developers, and nonprofit groups, supported interzonal crediting, while the City of New York opposed interzonal crediting based on the potential for it to discourage development of projects within the limits of New York City. The joint utilities opposed the change to the minimum subscription size, while some developers and nonprofit groups supported the elimination or reduction of the minimum subscription size. The order before you today adopts the recommendations in the staff proposal. It finds that the proposed principles are an appropriate method for determining what technology should be eligible. It finds that the removal of customer type-based technology and size limits will eliminate rules that are unnecessary in the VDER framework. It determines that extension of the value stack eligibility to clean resources that are not currently eligible, such as food waste digesters, will further encourage the development of and appropriate compensation of distributed energy resources. The order finds that, consistent with the staff proposal, CHP eligibility should not be expanded at this time. It instructs staff to work with stakeholders in NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, to develop a record that establishes under what conditions CHP can be made eligible while ensuring that its greenhouse gas emissions are no worse than system power and that it does not cause local impacts in sensitive areas such as environmental justice areas. The order states that staff's proposed methods for avoiding inequities to non-participating customers, including the application of mandatory hourly pricing to storage projects and the application of standby rates where otherwise applicable, are necessary and appropriate to ensure that participants in the value stack will pay appropriate rates and will not impose costs on other non-participating customers. The order also authorizes interzonal crediting. It finds that, for projects based on the value stack, interzonal crediting will not impose new cost shifts because the compensation for the project will be based on the value of the electricity at the generator site. Allowing interzonal crediting will simplify project development and provide benefits to customers. The order notes that, consistent with the joint utility comments, CDG sponsors will need to clearly communicate the expected compensation of interzonal crediting projects to customers, and notes that the mandatory disclosure forms under the Commission's DER oversight rules should include that information, or already do include that information, and will when they're prepared for those customers. The order explains that the Commission does agree that with the City of New York's goal of ensuring that projects are built throughout the state, including in the NYC area, but states that other methods, including the recent modifications to the New York Sun program and the ongoing collaboration between the City of New York, Con Edison, and the New York Power Authority, with the department staff's participation, are a more effective means of achieving that goal than imposing restrictions on other projects. The order does not modify the minimum CDG subscription size. It finds that any reduction in the subscription size would create some additional administrative costs, and that comments in favor of a modification fail to demonstrate a meaningful benefit that would justify that cost. The current minimum, 1,000 kilowatt hours per year, represents a very low level of usage, equivalent to a customer who owns a refrigerator, average lighting, and occasionally uses a TV and some other appliances, and therefore is an appropriate and reasonable minimum limit. The decisions made in this order continue the evolution of VDER tariffs as effective compensation mechanisms for distributed energy resources in New York, and the goal of ensuring that projects are appropriately compensated based on their value and support of the development for renewable energy resources. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ted. The value stack is now firmly and appropriately established as New York's useful and sensible approach for compensation for distributed energy resources. This item extends that useful and sensible approach to further DERs in a way that is pro-value and neutral on technology type and use case. This is what we should be doing. The other aspects of the order make sense to me. Recommended order makes sense to me as well. Interzonal crediting is a useful complement to our other approaches, providing flexibility that can help achieve our policy goals while fully protecting the ratepayer and public interest. I agree that the subscription size ask is not supported by the facts on the record. I am going to be in favor of this item. Commissioner Sayre.
I agree with the chair. In my view, it's good policy to continue to expand the value stack to new types of projects and to larger sizes of existing types of projects. This will help the state expand its use and installation of distributed energy resources with benefits, of course, to the participating customers, but also lower costs to the network overall and improved amounts of renewable energy in the system. But at the same time, we have to take good care that we meet these goals with our expansions and that we don't harm existing ratepayers and we don't cause increasing worse emissions than we have already on the network. The proposed order, in my view, takes appropriate, cautious steps to expand the value stack. We're far from the end of the road here, but I agree that we need to take reasonably small, cautious steps as the market develops. I support the order.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. Could you give me a status update on the DER oversight rules, what's going on, how we're monitoring them, and what the status is?
Yes. So the DER oversight customer disclosure form that will be provided to all customers participating in CDG projects or rooftop solar, as well as the registration form, were finalized by staff earlier this year. All DER providers building who participate in either CDG or on-site generation, such as rooftop solar, were required to submit the registration forms by it was either June 1st or July 1st. I'm sorry, I don't have the date in front of me, but it was earlier in the summer, and we're currently reviewing those forms and also comparing them to lists of providers available at NYSERDA and the utilities to ensure that everyone has complied with that requirement. And in addition, as of that same date, the providers were required to start providing a completed customer disclosure form to every customer, and also to submit sample forms to us to ensure that they're filling them out correctly. So we are, actively engaged in monitoring that market. I'm working with our Office of Consumer Services team to ensure that all of the applications are filled out correctly, and to go back to any companies who didn't fill out a complete application or who raised concerns. But so far, I think that process is going well. We're also accepting complaints from those types of companies through our call center and appropriately responding to those types of complaints. I don't have any data right now on whether or how many we've received at this point, but we've worked with the call center staff and OCS to ensure that they're trained to accept and process those types of complaints.
Okay, thank you. I think it is important when we talk about something in an order like the DER oversight rules that we are affirmatively making sure that we are sharing the status of them rather than waiting for a commissioner to ask, and make sure that we are engaging as it affects that analysis and what's happening. We may need to look at that and make sure that all staff and then folks involved are clearly looking at that and giving their input and feedback to make it a better product. Some of the concerns that I have with this order, and I will be voting no, is it, in my mind, inappropriately discriminates against CHP. I think that we have not clearly addressed that, and somehow we seem to be shying away from addressing that in a way that doesn't make sense to me, and we're not necessarily giving a time frame on when we may look at that, however it may be decided. Similarly, along that same vein, on page 10, the New York Power Authority argues that the electricity injection focus principle should be rejected, and explains why they believe that it should be rejected. We reject NYPA's rejection. We basically say that the electricity injection focus principle is appropriate at this time. We don't explain why we disagree with NYPA. And we don't go into that analysis, but we also, when we say while such consideration may be appropriate in the future, it would require significantly more analysis and modifications to VDR tariffs and perhaps to the applicable retail consumption tariffs that the expansions considered in this order. The question that I have when we look at this is that is a mouthful that doesn't necessarily explain the when, the how, the who, and the specifics on that. And my concern is by saying we may look at it in the future, or it may be appropriate to look at it in the future, that future could be next month, and so, or a year from now, or 2 years from now. And I think that if we're going to look at it, we need to carefully send a regulatory signal of why it's appropriate now, and why it may be appropriate to look at NYPA's position in the future and how we may go about that. My concern is also because we don't have specific direct oversight over NYPA. To the extent that NYPA is involved in this discussion and this issue, we need to be very clear as a commission when we may look at that for consideration. How does that get done? And if it gets done outside of the commission proceeding, we need to be carefully aligned with NYPA, and also not blindside folks in terms of how the proper process is. So for me, when I see that, I have more questions than answers in terms of that, and that concerns me. Overall, I do think that we try to address the anaerobic digester issue. However, I am mindful of the fact that while it does look at that and make some accommodations, an expansion of the NEMA issue for anaerobic digesters, it is not addressing, nor does it attempt to address, all the issues as it relates to the food waste digesters, and it is something that we need to look at. It is appropriate not to look at it here, but it is appropriate to look at and to address in a way that resolves fully some of those issues. And so I just flag that. Thank you for your work on this issue. I am going to be voting no, but it is something that I think, in light of some of my other concerns in the other item, are applicable here. Some of this has direct impact on other pending proceedings, including some declaratory ruling requests, I believe, and I think it's important for us to clearly look at those and make sure that we're expressly addressing what those may mean or not, rather than having to guess, because we don't want parties then having to ask for more clarification on our recent orders as well. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Lisi? Thank you. So I will now proceed to call for a vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to expand value stack eligibility and authorize interzonal crediting as discussed. Commissioner Sayer, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
No.
Commissioner Lisi, how do you vote? The item is approved and the recommendation is adopted. We will now move to the fifth item for discussion, or the fifth pair of items for discussion. Items 501A and 501B, case 15M0388, as they relate to confirming orders granting extensions to Charter Communications, Inc., presented by John Sipos, Acting General Counsel. Brian Asias, Managing Attorney, is available for questions. You're both here. John, please begin.
Thank you, and good morning, Chair Rhodes and Commissioners. Today for your consideration are two items, 501A alpha and 501B beta, in case 15M0388, which concerns Charter Communications. The two items are related. They both involve scheduling issues, and this presentation will seek to discuss them together unless otherwise noted. Both items concern the proposed confirmation of two earlier one commissioner orders that provided short extensions of time for Charter Communications to make certain filings. And in each circumstance, the extensions were requested by Charter. The first one commissioner order, which was issued on August 22nd, 2018, granted Charter's request to extend the time to submit petitions for rehearing pursuant to Public Service Law Section 22 by 14 days, or until September 10. And I should note that the Secretary earlier had granted Charter's request to extend the time to submit a 6-month exit plan by 14 days, or until October 9. The second one commissioner order, which was issued earlier this week on Monday, September 10, granted Charter's request to extend the time to submit the Public Service Law Section 22 hearing petitions by 30 additional days. And that same September 10, 2018 one commissioner order also granted Charter's parallel request to extend its time to submit the 6-month exit plan by 30 additional days. The requested schedule extensions addressed in the two orders reflect modest enlargements of time and are appropriate given the specific facts present here. In its extension requests, Charter stated that it and Department of Public Service representatives have recently engaged in productive dialogue in connection with the pending civil enforcement proceeding in Albany County Supreme Court, and that Charter was collecting and assembling information regarding network expansion efforts in New York State. In addition, as noted in the September 10, 2018 one commissioner order, the Office of Counsel had directed the cessation of certain advertisements which were considered to be false or misleading. Charter thereafter ceased such advertisements. The one commissioner orders granted Charter's request for 30-day extensions contingent upon the company's continued compliance with the Public Service Law, commitment not to run any false or misleading advertisements, and continued productive engagement with the department to address outstanding issues. During this brief extension provided by the one commissioner orders, Charter is continuing its network expansion work towards the June 2018 regulatory milestone and remains subject to the applicable public service law provisions and regulations as noted above. The legal standard here has been met, and in summary, the two orders, which are before the commissioners today for confirmation, provide for modest scheduling extensions that were requested by Charter Communications. And this concludes the presentation on the scheduling issues in item 501A and 501B, and we'd be happy to answer any questions the commissioners may have. Thank you.
Thank you, John. The discussion and the order and the presentation today demonstrates that the company has been responsive in a couple of important ways. One, in improving attachment practices in concrete ways that promote safety. That's a very good thing. And in exchanging information that can develop the record, and in exploring how we can most appropriately deal with the issues that are at issue in front of us. These are carefully, and I believe correctly grounded procedural extensions that allow this productive engagement to continue. These are also procedural extensions, reemphasizing that word, that leave fully intact the obligation on the part of the company to comply with the public service law and with our regulations and findings in the interim. I am going to be in favor of this item. Commissioner Sayre.
I am comfortable that in light of ongoing discussions and data gathering that the extensions are warranted and that customers are protected.
Commissioner Berman.
This two items have been carefully evaluated by me. I am a no on both items, and I think it's important that folks understand why. It is, for me, some threshold issues in terms of the special session. I believe it was wrong to have that special session, and I don't believe that the rationale for it is the right one. I think it is a slippery slope that there was a special session without me present, and that is concerning. From my perspective, though, I take a step back, and I'm not voting no because I was not at the special session and didn't have the opportunity. It's deeper than that. When I look at the issues, I need to look at the whole record before us. To the extent that we are deciding whether or not there's good cause for an extension of time on both issues, it has been couched as it's just process, it's procedural, and therefore granting it is in the best interests, and we should do it. There's good cause. For me, I need to look at what we have done and where we may go. And that is something that I think is very important. The integrity of the commission is vital, and the processes are very important. Under the Public Service Law, Section 22, the commission does have discretion, if good cause is found, to extend the time frame for a petition for rehearing. But we cannot abuse that discretion, and we must look at that. This body, the four of us, have never looked at what is good cause before. And to the extent that we go to the prior precedent, we don't have any prior precedent that council has found to show us. There is one Entergy case where there was an allowance of a one-day delay for petition for rehearing. And therefore, that's really it, the one-day delay. And again, the facts of that case and the delay were related very specifically to, I believe, a computer glitch. And therefore, it was appropriate. They thought they had filed, they did not, and the issue. For me, when I look at it, it's the message that I fear that we're sending is that if there is an order that someone's disagree with and they're going to file a petition for rehearing, before they file that petition for rehearing, if they're engaged in productive, whatever that term may be, productive dialogue between the staff, we can wait for the petition for rehearing to be filed past the 30 days. We've already seen where there was a one commissioner order granted for a short time, and then before that filing, September 10th, there was another request for an extension of that time because of productive discussions. For me, that means that if we allow that, there is no end in sight on when that good cause for productive discussions can be stopped. So the clock is not necessarily stopped because before that next extension, if there are still ongoing productive dialogues, and the determination of that productive dialogue is subjective, then we are continuing on this track of approving because we have met the low bar of the good cause. While we may or may not like it, the legislature did say within 30 days there must be a petition for rehearing unless good cause is shown. We've never used that. In this very session, we have two cases where we're extending the petition for rehearing. One is in item 268, case number 17M0815. In that case, when I look at it and I look at the good cause, it is focused on, because of the Jewish holidays, because of Labor Day, and working through the fact that it is a problem because they also need to reach out. It's a member organization that, on behalf of their members, needs to, in a short time frame, August was when the order was done, they have a very short time frame to file it, and it seems like we would be doing a disservice by not extending that. And so for me, I can see that being good cause because of the specific cases, because of specific circumstances. Here, the good cause being that staff and the company are having productive discussions. While that is a good thing, to me, it is not the thing that says, therefore, we will stop the clock and not allow the petition for rehearing to be filed. Why is it important that that petition for rehearing be filed? We just saw when we looked at the 101 item, how in 2016 there was a rate case decision, December 2016, and there was a piece of that looking at setting forth a collaborative. And as we saw, it took nearly 2 years to get through because we had to go through a phase 1 collaborative process and then a phase 2, and then after that phase 2 collaborative report, then they had 60 days from that to file their report. Both the Phase 1 and the Phase 2 reports also had some extension requests not related to petition for rehearing, and had some other back and forth delays. So we can see that the slippery slope of allowing delays can also impact other things. For me, the impactful piece of it is that by saying you don't file now, we are blocking the SAPA process, the notice process, and the opportunity to start that clock so that people have an opportunity to comment on what we may be doing, which may be helpful. In fact, in the one commissioner order, it talks about needing, this will help us with a fuller record. Ironically, if we had allowed the original petition for rehearing, which was denied at the July session, if we had allowed that original petition for rehearing to be noticed and SAP'd, we might have gotten comments and an opportunity for the parties, not just the commission and the staff, but others, to be able to, under our normal processes, engage in productive dialogue within that proceeding itself. And therefore, it is, for me, problematic to grant for good cause here when I am not truly understanding the connection between the failure to submit your petition for a hearing and engage in productive dialogue. Somehow I think that we need to be able to allow that petition for a hearing to be filed and shared so that it can move forward in the process while still maintaining the opportunity for productive discussions and dialogue. And perhaps we would need to look at what that would mean if the making public petition for a rehearing would have a chilling effect on those productive discussions in a way that would still allow the clock to be filed. For me, when I also look at the one commissioner order that speaks to ordering clause 3, and this is really a question for our general counsel. When I look at that ordering clause 3, it talks about, make sure that today's extension is contingent on and is granted upon the express condition that Charter continue to comply with the public service law and regulations and not air misleading advertisements. My question really is, from a process perspective, if Charter does not continue to comply with the public service law and regulations and airs misleading advertisements, what is the trigger then, and what's the date that the petition for rehearing is due?
So, Commissioner Berman, taking a step back, I guess I would first observe, I think it's important for litigators to be open to the possibility of settlement discussions or productive settlement discussions. I think that is an appropriate function that counsel and litigators can perform. And would also note that the company approached the commission and the secretary regarding the extensions. As to ordering clause 3, there are continued obligations upon Charter as indicated, the public service law regulations, and there is still the issue about compliance with the June 2018 build-out metric that the company is still working on. the coming days, the coming weeks will depend on.
Let me stop you. The question isn't about that. The question is a simple one. On the ordering clause 3, if they violate it, what is the date that the petition for rehearing would be due? It's contingent upon and is granted upon the express condition that Charter continue to comply with the public service law and regulations and not air misleading advertisements. Yes. I would say we need to have a firm date. I'm not looking to trick you. I agree. Productive settlement discussions can be helpful. I just think we need to clarify what that means when we say the extension is contingent on and is granted upon the express condition. My fear is, and this is why I raise it, if we are saying the petition for rehearing is extended, if they somehow fail to comply with the public service law and regulation that's outside of, forget about the misleading ads for a moment, or the alleged misleading ads. If they fail to continue to comply with the public service law and regulations, which would need who makes that decision, there may be questions on that. The issue is, does that mean that the petition for rehearing that should have been filed is not accepted because it's late, because it was only contingent upon if they continue to comply? Or does it mean the trigger is that the petition for rehearing is now due by the close of business when we give them notice?
Understood, Commissioner. I think I understand your question. The orders which are before the commissioners for confirmation today, and specifically the September 10 order, extend the Public Service Law Section 22 deadline out until October 10.
So regardless of whether in between this time they may do something, it's still due October 10th?
On or before, yes. But that's as to a precise day.
So
that is
ordering clause 3 then has no meaning?
No, it does have meaning, and it goes to the legal standard, which is a standard which vests the commission with discretion on reviewing petitions and requests such as this. But as to the outer date, that date is October 10, 2018. If something else occurs, so full stop. Second question,
right.
If something else occurs during that time, if there is an issue regarding compliance with a regulation, for example, hypothetically, I think that will have to be evaluated and determine what the appropriate enforcement action is. And, one option is to pursue further civil enforcement tools in state Supreme Court. But that's a hypothetical question, and I think that's about as much as I could say right now, given the question.
Okay.
Those are two separate. I see those as two separate
Thank
issues.
you. I appreciate that. Ordering clause 3 is ambiguous, and therefore I think we clarified now what the meaning of ordering clause 3 is. So in my mind, ordering clause 3 means that this petition for rehearing is due regardless of what happens October 10th. And that is a separate issue that we're just saying, I guess if you do something, we want you to still comply. But it has nothing to do, meaning that the trigger is if in between this time something happens or we deem it to happen, that we're going to now say either we got you, it's still, it's late, or now you owe us the petition for hearing today. That's still, no matter what, the date is now October 10th. I would not have interpreted it that way without this clarification.
With respect to Public Service Law, Section 22, petitions for rehearing, the outer date is October 10, 2018.
Okay, thank you. I do think that there is an opportunity as to relating to what I see as the threshold issues for what I see as threshold problems and concerns as raised in having the special session, as well as the underlying orders at that special session, that those are opportunities for me and for the parties when the petition for rehearing is filed. It is not, especially as it relates to the threshold issue of the validity of the special session, it is not necessarily just for the parties to raise, but it is something at the core of the commission taking a look at it and addressing it at that time, if and when appropriate. I do think that there are lessons to be learned from having the special session without me there. And I do think that going forward, we need to be more cognizant of taking into consideration what the perception is by not having a full commission body, -1 because there's a vacancy, regardless of whether council believes that there is an appropriate quorum or not. There is no one perfect regulatory model with processes. It is important for us that we move forward with appropriate legal mandates, adequate resources, and clear regulatory values and operating processes. We can always do continuous improvement and evaluating how we are doing things, and clarity, consistency, and stability of the regulatory structure is crucial, and that includes making sure the commission, each and every one of us, has a timely opportunity to have their voice heard, and it's not an after-the-fact situation. And I do think that we need, as a regulatory body, to be working together in that, and I look forward to focusing us on being unified in when the commission needs to act, the commission does so as one body, and each and every one of us are able to contribute in their way. So, thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Commissioner Brown. Commissioner Alisi.
Thank you. I'm going to support this and applaud the efforts of our very dedicated and capable staff in the department, and recognize that they have the same assets on the other side as far as talent, but we're still together and we're still communicating, and apparently it looks as though we're still negotiating. And that's the net result of the value and power of time. So we did set a limit on time last month. In fact, we took time away. We still have the power now to give time back. And I think that exercising the power that comes with having the time is the best opportunity that we all have at this point to move forward. Moving forward simply means that we have to extend the power of the time that we have. And I can't see for any reason why, after the actions we took last month, that we wouldn't try to continue to move forward. That was as far as I'm concerned, that was the engine that gave us this opportunity. So I'm going to support this, and I actually am glad that we have the opportunity to agree on this extension, assuming that we do agree. I'll be voting yes.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. So I will now proceed to call for votes, plural, 2 items. And I will start with 501A, or alpha, I guess. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to confirm the August 22, 2018 order granting an extension to October 10, as discussed. Commissioner Sayre, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
No.
Commissioner Alisi, how do you vote?
Aye.
The item is approved and the recommendation is adopted.
Excuse me, Chair, if I could just interrupt for 1 second. The first vote was an extension till September 10th,
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
just to be clear.
My vote is, so now we'll call for a vote on 501B. My vote is in favor of the recommendation to confirm the September 10, 2018 order granting a 30-day extension to October 10, as discussed. Commissioner Sayre, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
No.
Commissioner Alisi, how do you vote?
Aye.
The item is approved and the recommendation is adopted. We will now move to the consent agenda. Do any commissioners wish to comment on or recuse from voting on any items of the consent agenda, or to specifically have a specific vote with respect to any item on the consent agenda?
Yes. I'll be voting no on item 264, which is the granting, commission recommending to grant the NYSERDA's petition to allow any of the $216 million allocated in 2013 to the New York Sun program from the former RPS main tier funds that become uncommitted due to project attrition to remain available to the New York Sun program. While this may seem like a housekeeping item to other folks, I think it's very important that we look more holistically at all of the different funding streams and make it more clear and clarify and look more carefully at all of the different buckets, especially those items that in programs like New York Sun, where we had from the outset focused on the program going away, and then now we seem to be moving the money. And while we have done that in other avenues, I think it's appropriate to look at all of it, especially in light of the fact that we did get a lot of filings in the last week and a half from NYSERDA related to the Clean Energy Fund. I do think a careful and more comprehensive analysis of all of that is important for the Commission to have, even on voting on what to some may seem like a housekeeping item, especially because there were no comments filed. So for that, I am concerned, and I will be voting no. As to item 367, which is, I'd just like to comment on this item, which is the Energy Storage Deployment Program. I'd like to recognize that this is just voting on the final GEIS and not on the underlying matters that will come before us. The Energy Storage Roadmap, aka staff white paper, is on a separate track, has been SAP'd and noticed for comments. They've been coming in, and I expect, in line with the legislation PSL Section 74 and Commission precedent, it'll then come before the entire Commission body as a whole for a decision. And I have no further comments.
Thank you. With those specific votes factored in, we will now move to vote, and I will call for the vote. My vote is in favor of the recommendations on the consent agenda. Commissioner Sayre, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Berman, how do you vote?
Except for item 264, which I vote no on. All the other items I vote in favor of.
Thank you. Commissioner Alisi, how do you vote?
Aye.
The items are approved and the recommendations are adopted. Before I ask the Secretary if there are any further business matters, I'd like to take a moment while we're in session to recognize Lifeline Awareness Week, which is this week, September 10th through 14th. Since 2009, state utility commissions like us, and including us, the PSC here in New York, have recognized it the first week after Labor Day as Lifeline Awareness Week. And our collective efforts make an important difference to help eligible consumers participate in this vital program. An Awareness Week is an opportunity to remind folks. This is my opportunity to join in that reminding, so I do that. And there's a reason why I care, and I believe we all need to care. It's an important federal initiative, but what's important is that it's about safety and it's about protecting citizens, especially the most vulnerable. These are programs that help qualifying low-income customers connect to the nation's communications network. It positively benefits millions of New Yorkers, including more than 1 million here in, millions of Americans, including more than 1 million here in New York. It's an important program because it provides these consumers access to voice and or broadband services that can be a vital link in emergency health care, in dealing with government in emergency situations, in employment, in ordinary services. This matters, and I'm enthusiastically remind us of this. With that, I will now turn to the Secretary. Secretary Burgess, is there anything further to come before us today?
There's nothing further to come today. The next commission meeting is October 18th at 10:30.
With that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.